think man has eternally been obsessed with wanting to know where we come from, what is the meaning of this soap opera that we participate in, and what happens after we die.
And that's part of the problem in the modern world, I think. We're trying so hard, striving so hard, we're so ambitious to be independent and powerful. When people talk about being empowered, it kind of concerns me, because I don't think we're going to find this soul power, this very deep-seated power, in any effort to balance the control issues with people. That's striving too hard. And in fact, I think there's a paradox at work, that we would probably feel more power in our lives the more we could give it up.
The greatest battles of life that we ever fight are usually fought in the silent chambers of our own soul, and usually daily.
And that's what I try to get across to people. How you beat life and its pain is not by living forever or accumulating a lot of money, but of how you confront challenges and adversity. That's what we're talking about. If you ask the world, is life fair, the majority say no, life is not fair. My concept is that life is totally fair because everybody complains. But it's difficult. That's a different statement.
This question of how do we do it, how do we do it, how do we do it, is a completely bogus one at this point. And for most people, it is a completely hypocritical one. They've been to enough lectures and they've read enough books that they know. So they keep asking how, because they're trying to avoid the actual practice. I heard somewhere a quote from Pascal: all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
The mythopoetic tradition says that you do not do the work of finding out what your destiny is, of finding out what your pattern and your desires are in the world. You give yourself over to the world through a tremendous amount of attention. Whatever attention you can give, you give that. And the world comes alive to such an extent that it actually comes back and finds you.
People are eagerly turning to a growing number of new thinkers and philosophers for alternative directions, for healing, health, wholeness, to achieve their human potential. Inner space, the ultimate journey.
Anthropologists have found that cultures began inventing religions for themselves at the same time that they began creating pieces of art. In other words, the desire for transcendence is intimately connected with the desire for creativity. It is just as essential to who and what we are. So forever, mankind has been seeking a way. When I say we have been inventing religions, that doesn't mean we invent the religious experience. We give expression to the religious experience. So obviously from the beginning of time, we have been searching for this. So the answer to the question is no, I do not think that our hunger today is any different than it ever was. I think it's probably a greater hunger, though, because in this century particularly, we live in a world so alienated from the sacred experience.
I think what is going on today is deep pain, P-A-I-N, and that it's everywhere. And that at the forefront of much of that pain is just the need for survival. And the world has changed its logic system. We have a new standard, we have a new bar. The global economy has opened up everything. And the bar of quality has gone higher and higher and higher. And you can't fake quality. It has to come out of high-trust cultures. And you can't fake high-trust cultures any more than you can talk yourself out of problems that you behave yourself into. It has to come from real, deep trustworthiness. There's no other way.
Hysteria is the dominant theme of our society today. It's the fear of change, and yet the fact is that change is the most dominant theme of our civilization. We have more change in one decade than we have in centuries in previous times. And people find that this rapid change leads to unpredictability in their lives. And this lack of predictability, lack of control, lack of outlets for frustration, this leads to the anxiety and the angst that you see in our culture today.
If you say, can someone change their life, my statement is yes. I mean, most of us need to hurt in order to change. Not because somebody suggests it, but we say, I'm in pain, I don't like it, maybe I'll change. And I'd say maybe. But if someone comes to me with a complaint about their life, I say, change your life. If they say, well, how do I change my life? I mean, I'm stuck in a job or my insurance. I say, you don't like it and you can't change it, then change your attitude towards life. So if someone is miserable, that's them and their responsibility and their participation and their choice. Because I don't care, again, whether you're in prison or have parts of your body missing or have an illness. If you want to be happy, then choose happiness. I mean, that may sound like an absurd statement, but talk to survivors of concentration camps, a whole host of other things. They are talking about their choice. And that's what we have. Ultimately, only one choice. My feelings, my attitude, my mood. If I want to be miserable, I can be miserable. That's very easy. And I mean, I don't have to change my wife. I don't have to change my children. I don't have to change my job. I can just choose to be miserable. And on the other hand, I can keep all those things and wake up every day and say, I'm choosing happiness. And there's a very simple statement I read the other day. If you're here to contribute love, you'll find happiness. If you're here to get something, you will always be suffering because you'll never get enough. And I meet people angry when they die because they never got enough and they were so nice to everybody. Then I could have said to them, then don't be so nice to everybody, you know, or it's okay to ask for your needs.
The purpose of our lives and the high which we seek is not to be found from the material, but rather from something inside of us that then we give birth to. In other words, the love in our hearts, the compassion, that is what is the high we seek, the experience of that love. And ultimately we come to recognize that nothing in this world can give it to us. It can bring us pleasure, but it cannot bring us ultimately the joy that we seek.
I think there's a longing right now for the soul and for understanding what it means to live out your own pattern. That each of us has a pattern, that there's a pattern in the world, the greater world, and that our pattern somehow fits exquisitely, that I as an individual have my own way in the world, and that there's a way of fitting, and we're tired of not fitting in a way. Many of our organizations, our countries, our institutions, our marriages just aren't large enough to hold us anymore. They're just not large enough to hold us anymore. And so there's a way in which no matter how large an organization is, no matter how vast, it's not vast enough to hold even one single human soul. And I feel like we're all recognizing that now, and we all want our lives back now from our institutions, our organizations, our relationships. Not in a selfish way, but in a greater self way, in a way in which you feel you're able to give your gifts and they're not constantly being stifled all the time. And it just seems to be in the air these days. It seems to be the zeitgeist of our time that we've actually come to a threshold where we feel it's possible to actually do that.
Most people think in terms of quick fix changes. You know, they want something now, and so they get hung up on some particular idea or fad. It's kind of like cotton candy that you taste, you know, and it tastes good, but then it evaporates. It doesn't seem to have any substance that has enduring and permanent value. So I think that people's minds are too focused upon a quick fix. They're too focused upon what's the answer. They're not willing to pay the price in deep introspection and reflection, in really confronting the deeper issues and the questions of their life.
I lived in Hollywood for a long time, and there was this myth, I don't know if the story is true or not, that I think it was Lana Turner, the American actress, was discovered sitting in a drugstore or something like that. And I think a lot of us grow up with this idea that that's what's going to happen to us, that we're going to be discovered. And I think maturity includes the recognition that nobody's going to see anything in us that we don't see in ourselves. Stop waiting for a producer, produce yourself. Because if you have this idea that somebody's going to give me the chance to show what I can do, then what that implies to me is that you won't have been practicing. So even when you, quote, have the chance, the light's on you, what do? I think you have to practice being the person that you know you can be, even when people aren't looking. Because the universe is always looking.
We see what we seek. The ultimate purpose, the ultimate motive that you're trying to serve will affect how you see life. And how you see life will affect your whole response to life. It's called a paradigm, your view of reality. But our view of reality is shaped primarily by our deeper motivations, our deeper desires. What is it we are really about? Someone said, when man found the mirror, he began to lose his soul. See, the point is, he became more concerned with his image than with his self. We don't, in a sense, invent, we detect our sense of meaning. We don't discover it, we uncover it. It's in us already. And everyone has unique gifts and unique capabilities, and they also are in very unique need situations. And it's the marriage between those gifts and those needs that represents the contribution, the service potential. So you have to look outside, but you also have to examine your own heart, because that's where you'll find the mother lode is.
It's funny, isn't it, that it's so difficult to love ourselves. I think maybe the problem there is the word self. That's why I like the word soul. It may be possible or easier to love the soul rather than oneself. Maybe there is something about the very idea of looking at oneself and paying so much attention to oneself that is revolting, or it is difficult, and maybe it should be. Because that's not the way to be in this world, to be introspective, I think, to always be gazing at oneself and trying to work on the self. Again, the traditional teachings from all over the world say that if you lose yourself, you will gain it. If you lose your soul, in a sense, you'll gain it in a way. I mean, lose yourself, certainly. And this loss of self-consciousness, and I think in our terms today of trying to improve the self, which is what we're doing most of the time, if we can lose that and discover maybe that it is narcissistic, that means neurotic, you know, narcissistic. It means that we have lost touch with the soul. We have substituted self for soul. That's almost a definition of narcissism. Now, soul is something bigger, broader. It reaches out into the world around us and the people around us. And it is not a looking at oneself in a reflexive, self-contained way. It's rather discovering that oneself is out there, that who I am is in my relationships and in my family and in the work I do. I see myself in the work that I do. And that is not narcissistic. That is finding oneself outside oneself. And then we have a chance, I think, to love oneself. We can love our soul because we see it as separate from ourselves.
Most people say things like, someday my day will come, and when they realize they have a limited number of days, that's when they really get into action. We don't live lives, we live roles. More people die on Monday morning and have heart attacks Monday morning, commit suicide Monday morning. So we don't like what we're doing. And then, as one woman said, my disease gave me permission. So I can read letter after letter from people saying things like, I took time to smell the roses. Oh, you know, I really put in a rose garden. And these were people who were expecting to die who didn't. Now, we all die, but so many people have never lived. And I think that's why the disease becomes a gift, that they really begin to live their life. And as one man said, there's a stupid cliche, time is money. He said, time isn't money, time is everything. And so when you see a limited amount of time, you begin, as he said, to spend more time with the things and people you love. If you're reading a page in a book and it isn't important, you skip it. And you really begin to focus on that. And at the same time, as I said, people will straighten out relationships, quit jobs, move from where they didn't want to live in the first place, and then wonder why something nice happened to them physically as well.
Life is not so much about making ourselves better as it is about relinquishing all the illusions and the blocks to our greatness that are bred into us in this world. I mean, if you go through a preschool or kindergarten or elementary school, you can see the obvious capacity for greatness in children. And you can see how our systems, educational and social, dampen children's spirit. I mean, the irony is we think kids go to school to become great. We send them to school so that the system can just beat it out of them. And we've got to get out of that denial. We've got to stop that hypocrisy. Admit to ourselves that that's what we do. If we were more concerned about keeping children centered in their joy and less concerned about making them learn geography, if we were more concerned about teaching children to love and to live in compassion, the world isn't falling apart because children don't know how to spell. The world is falling apart because adults aren't thinking for themselves. But I think that has less to do with spelling, which is not to say spelling is not important, less to do with what we say education is about, and more to do with the fact that people are just so internally bound, so internally unfree. And when that spirit is suppressed, there's no genius. So it's not that some people are geniuses. Oh God, I heard a line. It was Buckminster Fuller. It was something like, geniuses are just people who had good mothers. I love that. And he would know.
So I think one has to have an alert appreciation of the roles one's playing. And many times in Western societies, the ego is in fact confused for self-esteem. People have an extremely poor self-esteem of them, in that they have a very poor opinion of themselves because they've never experienced that part of themselves that is immune to criticism, that is unfearful of any challenge, that feels beneath no one, and yet has love and simplicity inside it. There is a lot of confusion about self-esteem and self-ego in Western societies for the simple reason that the whole domain of psychology and behavioral sciences has lacked an essential component, and that is spirituality. Without a spiritual experience, you can never have true self-esteem because you don't even know what the self is. You're confusing it with the ego.
People escape into different psychological fads of self-esteem. They are ignoring the fundamental roots of the problem. For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root. I mean, imagine a person who is duplicitous, see, inwardly torn and deceitful, learning positive mental attitudes and better ways to dress and better ways to present oneself and to manipulate other people toward your own ends, or to build self-esteem through the various social psychological theories that are very popular today, but they're fundamentally duplicitous. It's flawed. Same thing with service. The essence of happiness is that it is a byproduct. You never go after it directly. It always is a byproduct of something that you contribute, that you give, that you make a difference, say, that you add value, that you serve, you contribute in some way. And to me, those are the two missing ingredients of much, not all, certainly not all, but of much of the literature and the focus on how do you get self-esteem, how do you get happiness.
I always say the sickest group I see are the children of today. Go into a junior high school or a high school, and there's such low self-esteem and self-worth. They are afraid to love, and if you ask them why, they say, well, I could be rejected. That's where parenting comes in. If you feel loved, you don't worry about rejection. You go out and love the world. If somebody doesn't want your love, you don't go home depressed. You say, they didn't want it. But you have a sense of worth. Most of the children today are depending on somebody else to let them know that they're okay. That's sad. And therefore, they don't risk loving. They're more likely to be destructive than loving. But what I saw was that love, joy, again, they're physiologic. I mean, if you spent 15 minutes laughing, do I need to tell you laughter is good for you? How does your body feel? If you play for a couple of hours, you know, and lose track of time, at the end of that time, if somebody reminded you 2 hours went by and you said, 2 hours? I thought it was 5 minutes. What is going on in your body during that time? And to me, love is probably true unconditional love, that when you're giving that love, you're probably at your healthiest of any of those states. And anybody who's ever done volunteer work knows that. And if you've spent time working for someone out of love, and then at the end of the couple of hours of that work, how do you feel? Wonderful. You go home elated. I always compare it, because people, when they relate to people, say back to animals again. A bird is brought into your house by one of your children. It's been injured by a car and it can't fly. So you take it in and you take care of it, and a few weeks later it's capable of flying, and you teach it again and it flies off. Everybody in the family is just standing there. It's so wonderful to watch this bird fly again. You don't look for a card in the mailbox, and you don't wait for a phone call saying, thank you for helping our bird. You know, you are rewarded by the act. And I think that's what people have to learn, that that kind of act, that kind of love, helps the person as well as the recipient. And if you do studies, you find that people who volunteer, do out of love, live longer, healthier lives.
There's a marvelous few lines by an ancient Chinese sage called Wu Wei, where he says, why are you unhappy? Why are you unhappy? He says, because 98.75% of everything you say and all that you do is for yourself, and there isn't one. 98.75% of everything you do and all that you say is for yourself, and there isn't one. Well, when he says there isn't one, what he's meaning is there's a much greater self than the self we usually use to question the world and to say, what is my life? Then that this self, this sense of soul, actually comes out of your relationship with the world. It's not just you by yourself figuring out what you're going to do with your life.